Hello, this is Brad Wild, and it's been a while since I've made a video. Too busy working, not enough time to fly. But this flight is in response to a question I had about flying the Challenger using VOR. So I thought I would do a short flight from Chicago, Midway, down to St. Louis using VORs with an ILS approach attached to the end. So I won't go through all the bother of showing you pre-flight and startup of this aircraft, but let's do some planning before we get started. So here we are at Midway, and our first VOR is Joliet, and I'm writing these frequencies down on a pad so I have them available, and that will become a little clearer why I do that later. Then Pontiac, down to Adders, then Vidalia, and then finally Troy. And from Troy, we're going to do an approach to the ILS using the VOR. But if we look at our takeoff here and our departure, our SID, we are going to be using runway 31 and taking off then to the northwest, circling around, and I'm just reading some of the instructions here, but they want us to climb to 1500 and then cleared to 3000, and after 10 minutes expect to be cleared to our final cruise altitude. So let's take a look at our approach plate. So here's our final VOR, and then we're going to fly off of one of these radials. I'll probably fly the 212 and pick up our initial approach fix here at Trish and 5,000 feet, and pick up our localizer and eventually our glide slope. So let's hop in the airplane and get it started and head out to the runway, and you can join me there. We are at the end of runway 31C and just getting a few things set up here. Let's dial in our altitude of 1500 feet and see if we can't maintain it. This thing has such a great climb rate that you can just blow right through altitudes if you're not careful. So I've got a notch of flaps, and I've set my heading for the runway heading, and let's see, I've got my VOR dialed in down here, so you dial it in on the standby pad here, and then you can just toggle back and forth. You can also use your second nav as a reference, and I'll show you how that works in a minute. So Juliet is dialed in here, and we'll get a DME once we get off the ground. So want to run this up on the N1 to the TO indication, and just watch the speed tape for that V1, and then try to keep things from getting out of control. Like I said, this thing flies like a bat out of hell. So let's see how successful I can be. Alright, advancing throttles. Release that parking brake. Run it up till we get TO on the N1. Finger on the G key for gear. And watching for V1 on the speed tape. There it is. Up we go. Gear up. And come back on our speed. And flaps. Try to keep it under 250 and turn towards Joliet.
Too low terrain. Too low terrain. Too low terrain.
Getting a terrain warning there. Why don't we climb to the next altitude here? And I'm going to go ahead and click nav, engaging our VOR, increase our power a little bit. Watching the 250 mark. Center our course again, and we'll just climb. So 25 miles away. Coming up on, oh, it's 3100. Whoops. It's hard to get this exact. Watching that speed. Alright, let's just say we got clearance, and we're going to take it to flight level 180. So increase our, let's go with flight level change and see if we can't get that to work. There goes our nose. I was hoping to keep it at under 250. Alright, we're back to climb on our N1. So I've got this set at, let's see, 250 now. Okay, I'm watching my VOR. Every once in a while I just click that course button to make sure that things are aligned. So our next VOR is going to be 1096, and I can see if it comes up over here. I'm using, this is nav 2. See if we can get some indication of that here. So it is pointed in just off to our left. So always the question is, when do you flip over from flying to that first VOR and going to your second? Especially when you're in an airplane that travels as fast as this one. You might want to start that 3 miles ahead of time. Alright, so that was a little sloppy, but this airplane is so fast that it's hard to keep it under control. And you get to 1,500 feet pretty fast. But, alright, we can increase our speed now. And we can turn off our landing lights. Come on. There we go. 1,000 feet to go. Coming up on Joliet. 6 miles out. When you don't have this plugged into your FMC, you do have to pay attention. Alright, we are at altitude and I need to come back on the throttles significantly, otherwise we'll get an overspeed. It's a fine balance here. Alright, so we're 3 miles away, and I'm going to go ahead and change this by toggling down here and then centering our course needle. And we've got 47 miles. Quick fly around. Passenger view. Kind of bright in here. Let's go over to our animations and yeah, there we go. Turn the lights down a little bit. So we are headed to our next VOR, which is Papa November Tango. So I won't bore you with all this extra flying, but when we get a little bit closer to the VOR, I'll chime back in. Alright, checking back in. We have 11 miles before our next VOR. I've tuned that in here. It's 17.2. So I also want to prep my standby, so that's ready to go, but you can see that our nav2 arrow is pointed towards the next VOR. In other words, I'm reading it and can change to it with impunity. So here's our route. We are approaching Pontiac here. And then next one is going to be Adders, 17.2. And once you pick it up, which I've done, you can go ahead and switch over anytime. But I usually wait till I'm about 3 miles out, and that way the momentum and the speed will make for a nice turn over that VOR, instead of overshooting it. So all I do is toggle it, and then I push direct on the course knob, and you can see we're making our turn. And then once I make it and get straightened out, I press that center one more time, just like you would if you were manually turning the knobs in a lighter aircraft. You turn it a couple of times just to make sure that you're aligned. Plane tends to overreact. So we are at true airspeed and ground speed of 405, just under our speed restriction, and our next VOR is 58 miles away. So, and that happens to be 114.3, so I'm going to go ahead and change it here. And it may come in because I'm high enough. Come on. As you know, VOR is line of sight. So the greater altitude you have, the better. Well, it doesn't look like it's come in yet. And I'll go ahead and prep it here. 14.3. So that I'm all set to go once we get there. You know, X-Plane 11.1, I think it was, gave us these heat waves coming out of the engines. These are SkyMax clouds, but they don't look that terrific, do they? At least I think they are. Yes, but I don't need the real weather connector or turn off some of these. But this airplane is real gentle on the frame rates, so it's a pleasure to fly for that reason. Alright, back in a little bit. Alright, we're coming up on this next waypoint, Alpha X-Ray Charlie, and you can see that it has come into play and it's already flipping for some reason. So we'll go ahead and switch over to that VOR, our next VOR, which is Vidalia Victor Lima Alpha. And let's get set up for Troy. Kind of jumping around here, trying to get situated. All right, Troy is 1600, and it does come in. In other words, we're picking it up, and we could fly directly to it. So 35 miles out. And we'll want to begin our descent when we reach Vidalia and start thinking about our approach and landing. So let's talk a little bit about our descent. I'm going to use X-Plane Tools Descent Calculator to get some idea of where we want to begin our descent. So we're at flight level 180. We're going to be descending to a target of 5,000. And let's just say our speed is going to be, let's round it off to 350 above and about 200 below 10,000 feet. And we can descend at 2,000 feet a minute. So we want to begin 31 miles out. So if we go back and look at our map, it's from Troy, or from, I'm sorry, Vidalia to Troy, it is 41 miles. So after we make that turn, we can begin our descent. And looking at our approach plate, I've decided I would rather fly the 227 radial and pick up Hixum. We're still at 5,000 feet. It's our initial fix. Just a little bit better of an angle. We could also use exhale, but let's stick with 227. So we are, just zoom in a little bit. So we have a little bit more of a turn here. So I'm going to go ahead and flip over to Troy, 1600. Whoops. So I've clicked our CRS knob and we're making a turn, and Troy is 39 miles out. Try again here. There we go. Sometimes we have to be actually past the VOR that we are flying towards before it'll begin a turn. So turning towards Troy. And we're about 35 miles out. Go ahead and put in a new altitude of 5,000 feet. And begin our descent. Thousand feet, and we need to slow down. Don't want to exceed our speed restriction. Now we could use our spoilers if we need to, but I figured 400 knots above 10,000. And let's just recenter that. Slight adjustment. And we are getting the arc here that shows our target altitude. So when we get a little bit closer, we'll talk about that final stretch and the ILS approach. Alright, we're passing through 10,000. I turned on our landing lights. I've got the spoilers out to slow us down. Trying to get down to that 200 mark. But we've got plenty of time. We are still, let me change the range here. Still 5 miles out. So I want to turn my course indicator to 227 as I pass over that VOR. So that would be over in here, 227. And we'll be flying outbound. So it's not a huge course deviation. Still have 2,500 feet to go, but we've got a ways before we actually reach the RIF. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and turn this. 229. And once you see this flip around, and now we'll make our turn. And we can slow down our rate of descent here to 1,000. And then I want to get my ILS of 111.5. and I want to monitor it over here. So you can see it pointing. So the runway is 30 right. So as this comes around to 30, that means we will be very close to our localizer. Watch our speed here. You can see the runway out here. Now the other option is to fly the heading and then switch over to our approach. And come on, level. Not sure why it did that, unless it's lining us up at 45 degrees, which is always possible. Because it's now, instead of heading, it's now localizer 1, so that's interesting. I'm going to dial in our course indicator to our runway, just as a reference, but this is the localizer. So the CDI, or the course deviation indicator, is now our localizer. And you can see we're coming up on our glide slope. And there is our turn. It starts slowing down. Spoilers armed. Notch flaps. I'm not quite sure why this happens with X-Plane, but I have visibility of 1.6. So I'm not sure why I can see as far as I'm seeing, but I think as I get a little closer, I'll see it, the visibility drop. So localizer and glide slope, right on the money. 160 is a decent approach at this point. So we're right in here. So this puts us still out about 9-10 miles. Yeah, there goes our visibility. Yeah, I think that's odd. Maybe I should have put in really low clouds. Watch our speed here. We'll drop the gear. And we could turn on that other light on the nose wheel. I think it's got 2 positions, yeah, landing. Another notch of flaps. And now just looking for that runway. Still have another 1,000 feet or so. Final notch of flaps. This airplane calls for a VREF of 129, I believe, at our current weight, and there's the runway. So, localizer, glide slope.
Minimums.
Minimums are good. And if I need to go around, I've got 5,000 dialed in here.
$500.
So off with the autopilot. Speed slowly comes down. Yeah, nice and foggy. I love it.
Glide slope. Glide slope.
Yeah, we're a little low.
Glide 100. Glide slope. Glide 50. Slope. 40. 30. 20. 10.
And reverse. Alright. Let up on the brake a little bit so we can make our turn. And before we taxi onto the active taxiway, we can stop here. We're probably going over here somewhere. But you don't need to see all that. We just want to clean up the airplane. The purpose of this was to show some VOR navigation and the Challenger 300. Hopefully I did it right and you learned something. So thanks again for joining me in the Challenger 300. Until next time, this is Brett Weil.